Good morning, guys. All right, so today we're going to be reading a nonfiction book called Out of This World that's going to be talking about astronauts. Now, this book is paired with the book that we read yesterday, Remember the Darkest Dark, that was written by astronaut Chris Hadfield. So this week it's a little bit different. Usually we read a story, and it's a fiction story, and it's make believe, and then we read a nonfiction book about the thing that we talked about in the fiction story so that we can have information too. This week's a little bit different because yesterday, remember, that book was not fiction. It was a story, a biography written by Chris Hadfield about his childhood and why he became a astronaut. So this is a little bit different. So we're going to be learning just informations about astronauts today, okay? So Out of This World. And we can tell that this is a nonfiction book is because we see our table of contents. And so on page 1, we're going to learn about astronaut training. Page 2, taking flight. Page 3, how do they sleep? Page 4, yummy food. Page 5, famous astronauts. Page 6, animals in space. Page 7, fun facts. And then page 8 is that nonfiction text feature, a glossary. Remember, that's where we can go if we see the bolded words and we don't know what they are, we can flip to the glossary and get a definition so it can help us understand that word. All right, astronaut training. Someone who receives special training to travel to outer space is known as an astronaut. Astronauts need to learn all about the space shuttles and space stations, and they also go through medical training in case of emergencies. Sometimes astronauts even need to learn Russian so that they can communicate with the Russian Missile Control Center. Models are used to help astronauts feel what it feels like to be weightless. So weightless means that you don't have any weight. Remember we talked about gravity is what kind of holds us down to the ground? Weightless means that you kind of don't have that weight because you don't have a strong gravity. It says astronaut training can take up to 2 years to complete. So it takes a long time to get ready to be able to be an astronaut. Taking flight. In order for a space shuttle to make it into orbit, they have to take off vertically. So when we say vertically, we're talking about straight up. Up and down is vertical. Earth gives off a gravitational pull that tries to keep everything from leaving. In order to break through the gravitational pull, it is imperative. That means that it must happen that the rockets gain speed extremely fast. A space shuttle leaving Earth must reach 25,000 miles per hour. This is known as the escape velocity. To give you some perspective, airplanes reach speeds of 500 to 600 miles per hour. So it is way faster than an airplane. How do they sleep? As many of you have already heard, when in space, astronauts do not feel gravity. This can pose some problems. If nothing is pulling them down, how do astronauts do things like sleeping without floating around and bumping into things over and over again? Astronauts have sleep bags that they are strapped to the wall. So look, you can see this bag, they've got her strapped into the wall. Her arms are still floating though. Another challenge for astronauts is that the sun rises and sets 15 times in a 24-hour period. So think about that'd be like having day and night, 15 different times while they are in space. This means they have to stay on a very strict sleep, work, and exercise schedule. Yummy food. In the 1960s, astronauts found that eating was very easy in space, but the food that was provided for them didn't taste all that great and was very limited in variety. The foods were in powder form and had to be squeezed out of tubes. By 1970, astronauts had access to hot water so they could rehydrate food. That means they put that water back in it, therefore improving the texture and taste. Today, there have been so many advancements that the only thing out of the ordinary is that astronauts have to submit a list of what food they would like to eat 5 months before their mission. So their food has gotten a lot better. But think about it, you have to tell them exactly what you want for a whole 5 months. Famous astronauts. Before becoming an astronaut, Neil Armstrong was a fighter pilot for the Navy during the Korean War. As 600 million people watched on television, Neil Armstrong was the first man to walk on the moon in 1968. He announced to the world that the Eagle had landed. And so if you remember, in our book yesterday, that's what Chris Hadfield watched. He went next door to watch the first moon landing and watch Neil Armstrong walk on the moon for the first time. Sally Ride received her PhD in physics before applying to NASA to become an astronaut. She had many jobs on the ground, such as communicating with astronauts and helping to develop a robotic arm that worked with satellites in space. In 1983, she became the first American to travel in space, American woman to travel in space. And then Mae Jemison was an extremely accomplished woman. She was a doctor, a member of the Peace Corps, an inventor, and a professor at Dartmouth. So she did lots of different things. She was also the first African American woman in space. Her love of Star Trek led her to apply to become an astronaut. So she loved the show Star Trek, which made her want to be an astronaut. So these are some important astronauts. And then animals in space. So scientists were not sure how weightlessness would affect humans. So many animals did trial runs in space first. So they were the first astronauts, if you think about it. Fruit flies were the first form of life that were sent to space. In 1957, Laika, a former stray dog, remember stray means that they didn't have a home, was the first animal to go into orbit. So you can see she's the first animal that went up into space. Ham, the chimp, became famous for his flight in 1961 because he was trained to pull levers that would give him a banana pellets in return. So he actually learned how he could pull a lever and he could get food. He was the first animal to do more than just ride around in the space shuttle. In 1966, 2 Russian dogs went into orbit for 22 days. Humans were not able to beat this record for almost 10 years. So animals did it first. And then fun facts. The word astronaut comes from a Greek word that means star sailor. So if you think about a sailor on the sea as you travel, this would be a star sailor. The astronaut spacesuit gives them air and protects them from radiation. So radiation are harmful rays that could get in of the sun and also protects them from extreme temperatures. Astronaut John Glenn was a senator for Ohio for 25 years. And then in order to become a NASA trainee, you must have 20/20 vision. It means you have perfect vision, pass a hard physical test, and have good blood pressure. So you have to be very, very healthy because when you're in space, that's really hard on your body. And then so here's our glossary. And that imperative means extremely important. Pose means to present. And then radiation is energy in forms of waves that can hurt you actually. Hydrate means to absorb. Rehydrate means to absorb moisture. A stray, remember we talked about the stray dog didn't have a home. And then weightless means not affected by gravity. That's when you can float. Okay. All right, you guys did an amazing job listening to that story. So what you're going to do next is you're going to connect to Seesaw, and I want you to tell me some interesting facts that you learned about astronauts. Okay. All right. See you later, guys.